Industry benchmarks are one of the best ways to uncover ideas to grow your mobile app. Check this out. This chart right here is showing D7 retention for apps in the travel category. In this video, I'll show you how to get similar data for your app category and how to mine it for insights. Let's start by accessing the right data for your app. Now, I think there's 3 criteria to choosing the right data set. Number 1, there should be lots of data in it. Number 2, there should be strict statistical methodologies applied on the data. And number 3, there should be useful logic applied on top of the data. Now, luckily, there's one source of data that I particularly like, and it comes from AppsFlyer. This is their app marketing performance benchmarks and trends data set. First, we have the category. You can see it starts with gaming, very common category. But we can do it into finance, shopping. In the dropdown for more, we actually have a lot of other categories: dating, education, generative AI, lifestyle, and so forth. So we can take travel, for example, here. Then we have a way to break apart that category. You can see there's 3 different types of travels. We'll take travel overall. We have a subcategory, which in this case means nothing because of the top level category, but you may have another level of categorization here. Now, let me pause here in the categories because naturally, the first question that came in my mind was, hey, how are these categories being created? So we do have a link here with more information that gives you descriptions for how each category makes sense. For example, if we have a game identifier, whether it's a puzzle game, or we have some of the other categories. So if we go down here to travel, we can see that there's a few different options here that are being rolled up into the travel category. We're going to see in a second why having the right category makes a lot of sense. So let's keep going. So we can have a country or region. You can go global, of course, but if you want to focus down to just a specific country, let's say just the US, you can do that. And then finally, we have channels where, again, depending on what category and subcategory you have chosen, you'll have different options here. In this case, we only see 3: organic, paid, and paid social search. And just like the category, how are these groupings created? So we can go to the FAQ section. There's a few FAQs. We'll come back to this in other questions as well. We have a question here called the media types groups, and we can see the different elements that will make up a specific category. For example, paid installs from paid ad platforms, pretty straightforward, but you can get pretty specific, with whatever platform or ad channel you may be using compared to other different options. So we'll take the paid, and then once you have this, you can just click get the data, and you get a bunch of charts. Now let's try to understand the data by focusing on one metric, which is retention. Now, retention is not the only metric you might care about, but we're gonna use it for our example in this video. So down here, we see the performance benchmarks, and we can see there's retention day 1, day 7, and day 30th. Now, depending on what you care about, you may focus on all 3 or just one of them. It obviously depends on the category as well. Some apps, for example, mobile apps, they lose upwards of 80% of users by day 7. So a day 30 retention doesn't quite make a lot of sense. It makes much more sense to focus even on day 1 and possibly day 7. So the app size is helpful as well, if you do see it depending on what filters you chose. Large are the top 20% of installs. These are typically the category leaders in whatever category you're looking at. Medium is 50 to the 80th percentile of the data set. And small is 20th to 50th percentile of the data set. Now, you may think, hey, of course, let me just look at large, right? I want to be compared against the best. But that's not quite true. You have to look at where your app stands, how much brand equity your app has. Are you an up-and-coming app? So you want to compare yourself against your peers at this point in time. You can, of course, peak at a level above you and say, okay, once you're an established player, you're a category leader, how do numbers look? This kind of gives us a glimpse into the future. But for comparison perspectives, you want to be able to look at actual similar apps in your category. And of course, finally, we see a breakdown by iOS and Android, and we have the different values. You can see the data here is by quarter. AppsFlyer updates this every 3 months. And then we can see, for example, day 7 retention in the last quarter of data, Q1 2025, is 8.9% for iOS and 6.9% for retention for Android. So now you can start to give a sense, okay, where do we stand on this? If you're above average, maybe you need to double down on what's already working, try to find and understand why you have a higher retention than your competitors. If you're below average, you of course want to understand the gap. What are competitor apps doing that you're not doing yourself that maybe should be implemented, whether it's how you onboard users, how you communicate with them, how you design the app. Now, quick break here. Thanks to AppsFlyer for sponsoring this video and of course for putting together such a rich trove of data. let's look at other metrics. Now, retention isn't the only source of insights, of course, as we can see. Now, we have to go back to the FAQs, though, to give you a sense of what's available. Back here, we see how each metric defined. So there's actually 17 metrics, and we have the metric definitions here. Number of installs, organic installs, paid versus iOS installs, remarketing sessions, and so forth. But it's always helpful to have the definitions. Honestly, whenever I work with data, my biggest annoyance is inconsistent definitions. So if we talk about retention, what are we talking about? Is it D1? Is it D7? Is it D30th? And what is the retention formula? If we go down here, you can see that the retention in this data is actually just open in the app. This can be a little loose for many apps, but at least you know what it is. And from there, you can compare apples to apples with your own data. So let me show you 3 other metrics that I found pretty interesting, and you might as well. So we have paid installs. So for example, we can see what percentage of installs are being driven by paid dollars across iOS and Android. And of course, with iOS, you have to include the SCAD network that Apple has, which is, the privacy makes it a little funky. But nonetheless, are you spending similar amounts of paid dollars to acquire installs? If you're lower, maybe there's room to increase your paid spend. And if you're higher, maybe you need to look at your organic channels, your own media, see if that requires further investment. At the same time, we can look at organic installs, right? The other sort of flip of the data against Android and iOS, and try to understand the same thing. Are we investing enough in organic channels, in brand equity, that we're driving enough installs, or are we heavily reliant on paid ads, which means that any kind of algorithm change, anything that changes in the ecosystem might completely derail our user acquisition strategy. And of course, we have CPI. Let me see where that is. I think it's here. Perfect. Very popular data, or data point. What is the CPI? It's interesting here that we only have Android for the medium size. Let's look at the large data, all data. So you might see some gaps like this in the data. The data is not perfect, and you might be missing a certain number of metrics for platforms, let's say iOS and Android. And of course, app size and some of the other filters you have may not be available. This is to be expected. There's so much data here across so many categories and so many different metrics that not everything is here. And in fact, this is generally a good sign that AppsFlyer is not putting out data that may be partially incomplete. That is, there may not be enough statistical data to give an answer, so we might as well not show it. Now, if you enjoyed this data, I'll put the QR code again on the screen. There's a link in the description to access the data. Again, the data is free. You can go look at it, compare your app and your category across different metrics, and kind of get a gauge as to how well you're doing, or of course, where the room for improvement is. Now, I want to double click on the role of paid ads. We looked at the paid install percentage just a few minutes ago. If this number feels too high to you, or you have concerns about it, then maybe it's time to start investing in more of your own media and your own channels. The next video will tell you exactly how you can actually use AppsFlyer to track your own media efforts, so you understand how you're performing here and how to scale this to acquire more users without paid dollars. My name is Ruben, and I'll see you in the next video.